Snow falls on a fresh grave. 4 men stand around the hole, and at the back, a woman in a black coat watches with eyes gone still as frozen water. A woman who stopped counting funerals at 11. She knows it wasn't an accident. Everyone knows. No one says it. This is Cold River. A town carved from a mountain that holds silver in its belly and murder in its bones. The kind of place where the snow always comes on a Wednesday, and money flows one direction only, toward the old man with white hair and a silver-tipped cane, who watches the burial from behind glass 3 floors up and never comes down. In her coat pocket, a letter she has folded and unfolded for 6 years. Wait for someone who isn't afraid, so she waits, every morning. Behind the same bar, then out of the snow, a stranger with river ice eyes and a scar along his jaw steps through her door and pays for his room in raw gold dust. He has been walking 19 years, and he counts to the grain. Nobody left Cold River, not because they loved it, not because the winters were gentle or the work was honest or the pay was enough to keep a family warm through February. They stayed because leaving cost money, and money in Cold River flowed one direction only, toward Edmund Volk. The snow started on a Wednesday. It always started on a Wednesday. Like the sky had a schedule, and the schedule had never once been wrong about anything. Big flakes. The kind that look soft and forgiving from behind a window. The kind that feel like a slap when they find your face. The kind that pile up fast and quiet, and don't ask permission, and don't apologize afterward. By Thursday morning, 3 inches had settled hard over Main Street. By Thursday noon, there were 4 men standing around a hole in the frozen ground behind the church. 4 men. That was all. Not because nobody knew Garth Pello. They knew him fine. Worked beside him in the dark below the 3rd shaft level. Borrowed his tools on Saturdays. Ate his wife's cornbread at the company picnic in August. Garth Pello had been in Cold River for 11 years, and in those 11 years he had never once caused trouble for anyone. Which was probably why he was dead. He had signed his name to a petition. 22 words. Carefully written, because he'd only learned to write at 34, and he was proud of that, and his handwriting was deliberate and slightly shaky. The way handwriting is, when it means something to the person holding the pen. 22 words asking for a 10-cent raise per hour for underground work below the 3rd shaft level. He signed on a Monday. By Friday he was at the bottom of shaft 3 with a rock the size of a wash basin on his chest. Accident, Deputy Birch said. Cave in, the company foreman said. Terrible thing, Edmund Volk said. From behind the glass of his office window 3 floors up, not bothering to come down 4 men around a hole. Snow coming down soft and relentless. The preacher saying something about God's plan and the wind taking the words and doing whatever wind does with the words of preachers at funerals in December. Cora Voss stood at the back, black coat, hair pinned tight under a dark hat. Face doing that thing it always did now, still, not blank, not cold. Something in between. Something that looked like water that had been very rough once and had learned over a long time to be flat again, to not show what was underneath. She was 58 years old. She had been to 11 funerals in Cold River in the last 6 years. She stopped counting at 11. Because after 11, it stopped feeling like grief and started feeling like something else. Something that sat lower in the chest, something heavy and patient and without a name. Something that felt, if she was honest with herself in the dark hours before the saloon opened, a lot like waiting. Orrin Dabbs stood beside her, big man, 56. Built like someone had stacked 3 different men together and called it one. Scar along his jaw from a piece of artillery casing at Chancellorsville. He didn't talk much at funerals. He didn't talk much anywhere if he could help it. But he showed up, every single time, because Cora showed up, and where Cora went, Orrin went. That was just the arrangement. Had been for 12 years. Neither of them had ever discussed it. The preacher finished. Someone threw dirt. Cora looked at the hole in the ground and thought about Nolan, about his hands. The way he held a pen when he wrote, careful, deliberate. Like the words were worth the effort. She thought about the letter he left in the floorboards, under the east table. She thought about the tin box. She thought about the 6 years she had spent reading that letter, and folding it again, and reading it again, and folding it again. Not yet, she thought. Soon, she walked back to the saloon. Orrin walked beside her. Neither of them says a word about Garth Pello, because what was there to say that the snow wasn't already saying? The Copper Bell Saloon sat on the east side of Main Street between the assay office that hadn't done independent business since 1862 and a boot repair shop that smelled permanently of leather and something older than leather. 2 stories, wood frame, painted white once, years ago, now the color of old teeth. A sign above the door that Nolan had burned into pine himself with a hot iron, the letters a little uneven on the N because the iron slipped and he decided to leave it. Cora had left it uneven on purpose. She unlocked the front door, stepped inside. Smell of last night's fire and old whiskey and the particular cold that only comes into a room that has been shut since midnight and has had all night to remember what cold really is. She went behind the bar, put the kettle on, tied her apron. Orrin started sweeping without being asked. Neither of them said anything about Garth Pello. Neither of them said anything about much. The broom moved, the kettle heated, the fire caught. This was the thing about the Copper Bell. Technically it wasn't Cora's. That was the part that people in Cold River had learned not to think about too hard. Because if you thought about it, you had to think about a lot of other things. And thinking about those things in Cold River was the kind of activity that got men dropped down mine shafts with rocks on their chests. The Copper Bell belonged to Edmund Volk, along with the 7 company houses on Birch Road, and the general store, and the livery, and the 3 subsidiary operations feeding off the main silver bell, shaft like roots off a tree nobody had planted but everybody depended on, and the company bank, and the contract sitting in Edmund Volk's desk drawer with Cordelia Voss's name at the bottom, dated January 1875, 6 months after Nolan died, when she had been alone and scared and not yet certain about what she was going to do. She was certain now, had been for a while. She was just waiting for the right sequence of events, or the right person. Whichever arrived first, she knew the letter by heart. Didn't need to take it out anymore. Cora, if you're reading this, I didn't make it home. Don't talk to Birch. Don't go to the marshal's office. Volk has a man there. The paper is under the east floorboard beneath the leg of the table near the window. It's a claim certificate, the original one. The name on the front has been changed, but you can feel the old letters underneath if you press hard. Keep it dry. Keep it safe. Wait for someone who isn't afraid of Edmund Volk. And Cora, I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. I was trying to protect you and I think I only made it worse. I love you. I have always loved you. Lock the door at night. She had read it on a Tuesday morning in October 1874, sitting on the floor of the back storeroom with the floorboard up and the little tin box open in her lap. And she had cried exactly once, for exactly as long as she needed to. Then she stopped, made coffee, opened the saloon. That was 6 years ago. 2,190 mornings since. She had opened on time every single one of them. The strangest thing about Edmund Volk was that he looked like somebody's grandfather. That mattered, because when people imagined men who did things that Edmund Volk did, they pictured something you could recognize. Hard eyes, a cruel mouth, a bearing that announced itself from across a room and gave you time to move away. Something that looked like what it was. Edmund Volk was 62 years old, soft white hair, reading spectacles, the habit of nodding slowly when you spoke to him, like everything you said was being considered seriously and with respect. He had a limp left leg, walked with a silver-tipped cane custom made in Denver. Told people it was an old riding injury. Nobody had reason to question it. He had built Cold River, not just the mine, the town itself, roads, church, school, water system. When you lived in Cold River, you breathed Edmund Volk's air, drank his water. Your children learned to read in a building with his name carved above the door. Very generous with buildings, considerably less so with people. His son Prescott was 24 and had his father's face without his father's patience, which was the one thing Edmund Volk had in genuine abundance. Patience, the specific patience of a man who had understood very early that waiting was cheaper than fighting and outcomes were more reliable when nobody saw you coming. Prescott was still learning that lesson, had been for 24 years. Wasn't close yet. The afternoon moved the way December afternoons moved in Cold River, slow and gray and full of small sounds. Wind against the glass. The fire adjusting itself in the stove. The distant rhythmic clank of mine machinery that never fully stopped, not even on Sundays, because the mountain didn't observe Sundays, and neither did Edmund Volk's production schedule. 3 regulars at 4. Jensen, who drank whiskey and talked about the weather. Old Marcy, who drank beer and never finished it. Young Corbett, knew enough to the work that he still looked surprised when the work hurt, which told you he hadn't been in Cold River long enough to stop expecting things to be fair. Cora served them. Listened. Didn't join in. This was her skill. The one she'd had since girlhood and perfected in 12 years behind this particular bar. She could be present without being there, visible without being seen. She could hear everything and give nothing back. And men talked honestly when they forgot there was a woman listening. Forgot she was a person and not just part of the furniture. Not because she was forgettable. Because she was very, very good at appearing that way when it served her. She heard about Garth Pello's petition. The other men too scared to sign. A rumor about Volk cutting the night rate come January. Deputy Birch riding out to the estate 3 times in the past week. She refilled glasses, nodded at the right moments, said nothing that mattered. Orrin caught her eye around 5. She shook her head slightly. Not yet. Just past 6 the door opened. Cold air hit the room like a blade. Every man at the bar hunched his shoulders without looking up. Standard Cold River response. Don't invite conversation. Let the new thing sort itself out before you decide whether to acknowledge it. Cora looked up. She always looked up. The man who came through the door was somewhere around 42. Hard to say precisely because his face had been weathered past the point where age shows normally. It showed as something else. Endurance. Like a piece of good leather left in strong sun for a long time. He wasn't remarkable in height or breadth. But the way he moved, that was something. He came through the door and he stopped. He didn't stomp snow off his boots right away. The way cold men always do. He stood in the doorway exactly 3 seconds and his eyes moved. And this was what Cora locked onto. His eyes went to the corners first. Not the bar, not the people, the corners. Then the back door, then the stairs, then the windows. Then he stomped his boots, walked to the corner table, darkest one, wall on 2 sides, took off his hat, left the table, ran one hand through gray-brown hair, sat. He had a scar, left jaw, started below the cheekbone and ran down to where the jaw meets the neck. Old scar, silver white. The kind you only get from something that was trying very seriously to kill you and came close enough to leave its mark before it failed. Cora went over. What can I get you? He looked up. Eyes the color of river ice. Pale gray-blue, not warm, not cold, just very focused. The eyes of a man who looked at things and actually saw them. Coffee, he said. Black, we have whiskey, I know. Not unfriendly. Statement of fact. Coffee. She brought it. He wrapped both hands around the mug and looked at the fire. She went back behind the bar. Orrin was watching her. She said nothing. Picked up a glass. Started drying it. But she was watching his hands. Wrapped around that mug, they were hard to ignore. The knuckles, the texture, the specific callus you only build one way. Not from fighting, not from roping, not from the kind of work a drifter's hands show. That was the callus of someone who had spent years gripping a survey rod or a pickaxe handle. Someone who had worked the earth. The kind of earth that has silver in it here, specifically here. He paid for his room with gold dust. Raw, unprocessed, still gritty with the sand it came out of. He counted it onto the bar without a scale. But he knew exactly how much he was putting down. To the grain he knew what it was worth. Of course he did. After closing, when Jensen and old Marcy and young Corbett had gone home and the fire was banked low and Orrin was putting chairs on tables, Cora wiped down the bar. The stranger had gone up 2 hours ago, but he'd left something. She almost missed it, under the edge of the mug, barely visible. She only found it because she was thorough about table wiping and went under the rim out of habit. A coin, she picked it up. Silver, dollar, old. The shine gone, worn to a soft, dull gray by years of handling. But the marking on the back was what stopped her hand, stamped in letters that had been official once and were now rubbed almost smooth by time. C.R. Assay Office, 1859, Cold River Assay Office, 1859. She stood very still for a long time. The C.R. Assay Office had closed in 1862. Edmund Volk purchased the building that year, converted it to company storage. There was no reason for anyone to carry a coin from that office, unless they had been in Cold River before 1862. Before the Volk operation. Before everything that Cold River currently was. Before Orrin came up behind her. Looked at the coin. Cora. She closed her fingers around it. Go home, Orrin. He looked at her the way he always did when deciding whether to push back. He decided not to. All right. He got his coat. Stopped at the door without turning. Whatever you're thinking, I'm not thinking anything yet. Whatever you're going to think then, go home, he went. Cora stood alone in the empty saloon. Fire down to coals, wind pressing at the windows, the coin warm now from her grip. She thought about Nolan's letter. Wait for someone who isn't afraid of Edmund Volk. She opened her hand. Looked at the coin. She thought, maybe. Then she put it in her apron pocket and went upstairs, and she did not sleep. Not even a little. The second night was when things started moving. Prescott Volk came in at 8 with 2 men behind him the way he always did. Doss and Keel. Doss was 40 and thick through the middle, with the face of a man who had hit a lot of people, and found it neither satisfying nor particularly unpleasant. Just a thing that happened sometimes when he was working. Keel was younger and meaner in a focus-specific way and had once broken a man's arm over a card game and seemed to regard this as a professional credential. Prescott was 24 in a broadcloth suit made for him in Denver by a tailor who understood that the customer wanted very much to look like a serious man. The suit was good. The boots were custom. The Colt on his hip was silver-plated with an ivory grip and a V worked into the ivory. He had never started a fight on even terms in his life. They came in and the room temperature changed, not because of Prescott directly, because of what Prescott represented. The knowledge that his father owned the building you were sitting in, owned the ground under it, could, through a simple sequence of legal arrangements supported by Deputy Birch and the territory's cooperative judicial structure, make every person in this room's life considerably worse before breakfast tomorrow, and not lose a night's sleep over it. Jensen left, quietly, without being asked. Corbett left. Old Marcy stayed because old Marcy was on his 3rd beer and had reached the elevation where consequences felt theoretical. Prescott came to the bar. Cordelia, he said. Nobody called her that. He knew nobody called her that. He used it because he knew. Mr. Volk, she said. My father's been patient. She said nothing. Kept wiping. The contract extension has been on the table 3 months. Still wiping. Mrs. Voss, a pause. Cora, I'm trying to have a conversation. You're having one, she said. I'm listening. He put his hands on the bar, leaned in, his father's habit. The idea that closing physical distance is a form of argument, sign the extension. It's a reasonable document. It has a clause, Cora said, giving your father the right to terminate the lease at his discretion, without notice or compensation. Standard language. It wasn't in the original. Times change. So I've noticed. She looked up at him. Level, not aggressive, not afraid either. Just level. The look of a woman who had spent 6 years deciding she was not going to look down anymore. My answer is no, Mr. Volk. Same as last time. Same as the time before. Prescott's jaw worked. He wasn't stupid exactly. But he was the specific kind of man who had never been told no by someone he considered beneath him. And the experience produced in him a kind of internal short circuit. A sparking confusion between what he knew he should do, which was maintain the performance of civility, and what he wanted to do, which was demonstrate that no was not available to a woman in Cold River who owed rent to his father. My father is going to be very disappointed, he said carefully. I expect he will. Prescott stepped back from the bar, looked around the room. Recalibrating, old Marcy was very interested in his beer, Orrin behind the bar, both hands below the counter, not moving, and the stranger in his corner. Same table, same stillness. Coffee again. Cora had almost forgotten about him in the noise of Prescott's arrival, but he was there, and his pale gray eyes were not on Prescott. Not on Doss or Keel, they were on her, specifically on her. Watching something she couldn't quite name, Prescott noticed him. Who's that? Guessed. He got a name? Most people do. Something shifted in Prescott's expression. The calculation gave way to something less controlled, Cora. Softer now. Which was worse. Softer was how Prescott got when the business conversation was ending and something less professional was beginning. Just sign the paper. Everything stays the same. You keep your saloon. My father keeps his patience. Nobody has to have a difficult evening. Everything, Cora said, is not something I want to preserve. That was the wrong thing to say, or the right thing. Depending on what she was trying to start, Prescott's hand came across the bar, open-handed. Not a punch, something designed to humiliate more than hurt, The kind of blow that says you are small, and I can do this, and nobody here will stop me. But it was harder than he intended, and it caught the side of her head, and she went sideways, and her hip hit the back counter, and she went down, knees first. Then hands. The sound of it in that room was specific. The sound of a line being crossed that had always been there, and had previously been respected and was not being respected now. Old Marcy set his beer down. Orrin came over the bar. Keel had his gun out before Orrin's feet hit the floor. "Don't," Keel said. Very quiet, not a warning exactly. More of a notification. And stopped, fists closed. Veins in his forearms standing up like rope, but he stopped. Cora got her hand on the edge of the bar, started pushing herself up, slow, deliberate. Prescott looked down at her. His expression had passed anger and arrived somewhere more complicated, something that might have been regret in a different man. But Prescott was not a different man. He was deciding, double down or retreat. And the room was watching, and the room's eyes mattered to him more than anything else in that moment because the room's eyes were the only audience he had. He made the wrong decision. He raised his hand again. The sound of a chair scraping on the floor. Not dramatic, not fast, just a chair. Moving, then silence, then footsteps. Not quick footsteps. Not the footsteps of a man reacting. The measured, unhurried footsteps of a man who has decided exactly where he's going and sees no reason to rush, because rushing is what you do when you're uncertain about the outcome. The stranger walked from the corner to the door, not to Prescott, not toward Cora, to the door. He picked up the iron crossbar leaning against the wall beside it. Heavy thing. Iron-reinforced timber. He fitted it into the brackets on both sides of the door. Thunk, the sound of it dropping into place was the loudest thing in the room. He turned around. The lamplight was on his face now. Full on. The scar along his jaw was very clear in that light. The eyes were very clear. That pale gray blue. Ice over something deep. He looked at Prescott Volk. He did not look scared. He did not look angry either. He looked like a man who has arrived somewhere he has been going for a very long time and is noting, with a kind of quiet satisfaction, that he has arrived. "Help her up," he said, low voice. No need for loud in that silence. Prescott stared at him. "Who the hell are you?" "Someone who knew your father," the stranger said, "before he was rich." No sound in the room at all. "Someone who knows the difference," he continued, taking one step forward. Just one, unhurried. Between a man who built something and a man who stole something and spent the rest of his life calling it the same thing. Prescott's jaw tightened. "That's a dangerous thing to say in Cold River. I expect it is, Doss." Keel. What happened next was quick and was not. Both things simultaneously, the way violence always is when it belongs to someone who has done it before. Slow enough for every movement to be deliberate. Fast enough that nobody watching could quite describe the sequence afterward. Doss moved first. The stranger stepped into his reach instead of away from it. Not what Doss expected. Half a second of confusion. That was all it took. Doss's wrist went sideways at an angle. Wrists don't travel. A sound from the joint. Doss sat down on the floor. Keel had his gun up. The stranger was not where he had been. He was beside Keel. The gun went up and back. Keel's arm following it to an angle arms don't naturally take. Keel made a sound and sat down next to Doss. Two men on the floor, maybe 5 seconds. Prescott had his silver-plated Colt out, hands shaking. Which mattered. Not because the gun wouldn't fire. Because hands that shake are hands that are afraid, and afraid is a very different thing from dangerous. He fired. Shot went wide. Struck the wall above the bar. Splinters. The stranger had not moved. The smoke drifted between them. He was standing exactly where he had been. Looking at Prescott. Not ducking. Not flinching. Standing in the smoke the way a stone stands in a river. Like it was there before the water and would be there after. "You shoot," he said quietly, "like your father did in '61. A pause. "Fast," he said. And scared, Prescott's gun hand dropped slightly. "Who are you?" His voice was smaller now. The suit was the same. The boots the same. But something essential had left the room and not come back. "How do you know my father?" The stranger said nothing for a moment. He picked up Keel's gun from the floor, set it on the bar. Then Doss's, from under the table, set it beside the first. He looked at Prescott for a long moment. "Go home," he said. "Tell your father. Tell him Jedediah Karn walked out of the snow he left him in. Tell him I've been walking for 19 years. He sat down at the nearest table. picked up an abandoned whiskey glass still half full from someone's earlier evening. Set it back down without drinking. Tell him I'm done walking. Prescott left. Doss and Keel left, which in Keel's case involved some assistance. Old Miss Marcy looked at his beer, looked at the stranger, looked at Cora behind the bar with a cloth pressed to the sides of her head and blood seeping through it slowly. Reckon I'll go home, old Marcy said. He left exact change on the bar. Orrin locked the door, came back, leaned on the bar and looked at the stranger. The stranger was watching Cora. Cora was watching him. Jedediah Karn. She said, Jed's fine. How long have you been planning to come here? He considered this seriously. Since 1874. When a man named Nolan Voss sent me a letter, the cloth of Cora's hand went still. Her face did that thing. The thing the surface of still water does when something hits it. A brief disturbance, then flat again. But the disturbance had been there. You knew my husband. I knew of him. He found me. I was in Billings. The letter found me anyway. He said he was reaching out to you. He did. I didn't know if it got through. It got through, Jed said. 3 weeks too late. She put the cloth down. The bleeding was slowing. She looked at him a long time with those still eyes that had spent 6 years learning to give nothing away. Why did it take you 6 years to come? Because arriving empty-handed would have been the same as not arriving at all. Your husband told me what he found, where to look. I spent 6 years finding the right pieces, so that when I came, coming would mean something. And does it? Ask me in the morning. Orrin exhaled slowly. The sound of a man making a decision. I'll make more coffee, he said. Later. Much later. When Orrin had gone and the fire was coals and the saloon was dim and cold and theirs alone, Cora reached under the bar and brought out the good whiskey. Not the blend she served the regulars, the real bottle. She poured 2 glasses. Set one in front of Jed. He looked at it. I said no whiskey. That was before, she said. He picked it, held it. The way a man holds something he gave up long ago and isn't sure he trusts himself around anymore. Cora drank hers. He left a letter, she said. Nolan, in the floor under the east table. A claim certificate, original one. Edmund Volk's name written over the real owners. Jed looked up. He said to wait for someone who wasn't afraid of Edmund Volk. And, you're the first person in 6 years who hasn't been. Jed set the whiskey down. He reached into his coat, inside pocket, brought out something wrapped in canvas, tied with cord. He untied it, unfolded the canvas. A piece of paper, old, size of a playing card. The edges not cut, torn, deliberately torn, along a line that curved in a specific way. He placed it on the bar. Cora looked at it. Looked at him. She went to the east table. Crouched down. Her knees ached the way knees ache in cold weather at 58. She found the notch Nolan had made with his pocket knife, pressed, lifted the board, the tin box. Always there. Never moved. She brought it to the bar, opened it, took out the claim certificate, laid it beside Jed's torn piece. The edges matched. Perfectly. Immediately. The way 2 halves of one thing always match when they find each other after a long time apart. Neither of them spoke. They just looked at it. 2 pieces of the same document lying on the bar of a saloon in a Montana snowstorm, whole for the first time since 1861. 19 years. And everything those years had held. Edmund Volk, Cora said finally, has spent 18 years telling this town he built it. He built it, Jed said. Just not with anything that was his. Cora folded the papers together carefully, the same way Nolan used to fold things. Attention to the crease, pressure at the edge. My husband died because he found the truth. Yes, and you came here to finish what he started. I came here, Jed said, to do what I should have done 19 years ago. Which is show up. He looked at the bar. I'm late. Cora looked at him. Something in her face that wasn't warmth exactly but was in its neighborhood. The recognition of a quality she understood. The quality of a person who had been wrong about timing and was not going to be wrong about the thing itself. You're not late, she said. She put the papers back in the box, snapped it shut. Get some sleep, Mr. Karn. Tomorrow Edmund Volk knows you're here, and the day after that is going to be very long. She went upstairs. Jed sat alone in the dark, looked at the coals, picked up the whiskey glass he still hadn't touched, swirled it once, set it down, stood, went to the window and looked out at Main Street in the snow. Cold River, Montana. December 1880. He had been here before. A long time ago when he was 23, and the town didn't exist yet, and the mountain was just a mountain with silver in it. and a future that would belong to whoever got there first and filed the right papers. He had filed the right papers. He remembered that morning, clear cold October day, smell of pine and fresh earth, hand unsteady with the pen because he'd never filed a mining claim before, and it felt important, and he wanted the letters right. He had gotten the letters right. And then a man named Edmund Volk had taken that paper and said something quiet to a man named Fetch Mallory. Jedediah Karn had walked out of the assay office and not made it to the end of the street. He had woken up 2 days later in a ditch 8 miles south, hole in his left side, face full of blood, no papers. Nothing but the torn corner of his own claim certificate caught in his coat pocket where they'd ripped it from him and missed one piece. He had not died. He had wanted to. Briefly. Then he had decided not to. 19 years. He looked at the light in the window of the Volk estate up on the hill, warm and certain of itself. Tell him I'm done walking. He turned from the window, went to bed. Tomorrow was going to be a long day. Edmund Volk did not sleep, which was unusual. Edmund Volk slept well, had always slept well. The particular sleep of a man who had made peace with his decisions, and found that peace required very little maintenance. He had done what was necessary. The territory was not gentle, and gentle men did not survive in it, and Edmund Volk had survived in it for nearly 20 years, and that was its own answer to any question about methods. But tonight he sat in the leather chair by the window of his study and looked at the lamp. Prescott had come home at 10. Doss holding his wrist, Keel moving carefully. Prescott, wearing the specific expression of a young man who has discovered for the first time that the world does not automatically arrange itself around his comfort and is not yet sure how to carry that information. He had said the name, Jedediah Karn. Edmund had said nothing for a long time, long enough that Prescott fidgeted, which Prescott always did when silences outran his ability to fill them. Then Edmund said, "Send for Fetch Mallory." That was all. Prescott had gone to bed eventually. After hovering long enough to make clear, he wanted more than that. More strategy. More of the controlled certainty Edmund usually projected the way a stove projects heat. Automatic, ambient, only noticeable when it disappeared. Edmund had nothing for him tonight, because Jedediah Karn was alive, which meant 19 years of construction were sitting on a foundation with a crack in it. Not a fissure, not a collapse, a crack. Small, specific. But cracks in foundations are not judged by their initial size. They are judged by where they run. He thought about 1861, a young man filing a claim at the assay office on a clear October morning. Careful handwriting. The conversation Edmund had with Fetch Mallory that same afternoon. Specific instructions, specific location, specific outcome required. Buffek told me it was done. Buffek was wrong. And then a thought he had not had in a very long time, kept buried under the weight of everything subsequently built. He thought, I should have done it myself. Fuffix Mallory arrived at midnight, alone. He always came alone. 45 years old. Face of a man who had stopped explaining himself around age 15 and had not missed the practice. Plain duster, plain hat, plain Winchester. The only thing not plain about him was his eyes, which were always calculating. Distance, weight, odds. The arithmetic of every situation before and after. Edmund let him in. They sat in the study. Edmund said the name Buffek did not react the way Prescott had. No going pale. No intake of breath. A very small stillness, 2 seconds. Then the arithmetic resumed. Alive, Edmund said. I need him alive. Before he dies, I need to know what he's already sent out, who he's written to. What's in motion? Fetch looked at him steadily. Nolan Voss contacted him in 74. Edmund said, they corresponded. There may be copies. There may be people in Helena with documents already. How do you know about Voss? I've known about the floorboard for 4 years. I chose not to act on it because acting would have drawn attention to what was underneath it. Edmund paused. A dead widow is a question. A quiet widow is just a widow. Fetch absorbed this. The woman, he said, secondary. Karn has the other half of the original claim certificate. Together, the two pieces constitute a complete document predating my filing. In front of a federal court, that document is sufficient to challenge everything. How many men? Edmund considered. Not the number. What the many meant alarm. Too few meant failure. And failure now, with Jedediah Karn sitting in the saloon he'd built on stolen ground, was a very specific kind. The The kind you don't recover from, 16, Edmund said. And fetch, Mallory looked at him. Not tonight. Wait for the dark before dawn. Give him one full day thinking he's chosen his ground. Let him feel settled, and then remind him, Edmund said quietly, that there is no ground in Cold River that isn't mine. The morning after, cold, clear, the overnight snow settled hard and the December sky was the specific blue you only get in Montana in winter, so sharp it looked capable of cutting. Beautiful the way a blade is beautiful. You could appreciate it from a safe distance. Cora opened the saloon at 7. Same as always. Orrin came at 7:15. Same as always. Looked at her sideways when he came through the door. Checking. The way he always checked. Looking for something wrong she wasn't telling him. The bruise at her temple was purple now. Soft and rhythmically painful, like her heartbeat had relocated there temporarily. She had covered worse. The apron went on. Coffee went on the stove. The fire caught. Jed came down at 8, sat at his corner table. Coffee, he said. I know, she said. She brought it. He wrapped his hands around the mug. Looked at the fire, same table. Same stillness. Same pale gray-blue eyes looking at the fire. Everything the same, except nothing was, and both of them knew it, and neither felt the need to say so out loud. Orrin refilled his own cup and found the ceiling extremely interesting. Mallory will move tonight, Jed said. Low. The way you'd mention weather. Or tomorrow, before dawn. I know. Edmund won't come himself. He never does. He'll want me alive long enough to find out what I've already sent and where. And what have you sent? Cora asked. And where? Jed looked up. Before I answer that. The floorboard. The box. Are there copies? Cora's hand rested on the bar. Nolan made 2, she said. The original is in the box. A handwritten copy I sent to a law office in Helena in the spring of '79. Which office? Hargrove and Webb. State Street. No business with Volk. They represented a successful claim dispute against the Anaconda operation 2 years before. I sent it with a letter asking them to hold it pending contact from a federal marshal. Jed looked at her for a moment. You've been doing this longer than I have, he said. 6 years? She said. Yes. Have they contacted you? Once. 80. Asking me to confirm the document was genuine and provide a secondary witness to Nolan's death. She paused. I sent them Orsin's signed statement. Orrin raised his coffee mug slightly without looking up. Jed sat back. Something small shifted in him. The recalibration of a man discovering the situation he walked into is considerably better prepared than he realized. Not relaxed. Recalibrated. All right, he said. He reached into a different coat pocket, brought out a sealed envelope, addressed in careful block letters to the United States Marshal, District of Montana, Helena. I wrote this in Billings before I left. Gave it to a freight driver named Aldous Peck. He runs the Helena route, owes me a favor I'd rather not explain. It names Volk, names Mallory, references Hargrove and Webb, requests a marshal. Cora looked at the envelope. When did Peck leave Billings? 4 days before I did, she calculated. He'd have arrived in Helena 3 days ago. If the roads were clear, the fire crackled. A log shifted and threw up a brief small spray of sparks. So the marshal may already be moving, she said. Maybe. 2 days at most if he left immediately. 2 days. She turned that over, all the angles of it, the geometry of 48 hours. What could happen in 2 days? What she had held together for 6 years with patience in a tin box and a letter she knew by heart. 2 days was nothing. 2 days was everything. Mallory has 16 men at the mining camp east of town, she said. Corbett told me last month. He bunks near them, armed, Winchesters, at least one scattergun, and Deputy Birch. Cora was quiet. Birch is complicated, she said. How complicated? He has a daughter, 8 years old. Goes to the school Volk built. She paused. Birch has been in Edmund's pocket as long as he's been deputy. But there's a difference between a man who does wrong because he wants to, and a man who does wrong because he can't see another way. You think he'd turn. I think if he understood what was actually happening, and believed there was a version of this where his daughter grows up in a town not owned by a murderer, he might make a different choice. She paused. He might. Jed drank his coffee. What's your plan, he said. Cora's chin came up slightly. The look of a woman who has been waiting for exactly this question for a very long time. Doc Prentice, she said. Doc Prentice was 71 years old. He had been in Cold River since 1871 and was the only man in town who owed Edmund Volk nothing. Not because he was wealthy. Because he was old enough and skilled enough that Volk needed him more than he needed Volk, and both men had understood this from the beginning. And it had produced between them a grudging mutual non-interference lasting 9 years. Prentice had set bones, stitched cuts, pulled teeth, delivered children of company foremen. He had also written 3 cause-of-death certificates for men whose bodies had told him one story and whose paperwork was required to tell another. He had written what he was told. Because he was old and alone and had convinced himself that staying alive was more useful than being accurate on paperwork, he had told himself this for 9 years. He was no longer sure he believed it. Cora went to him in the afternoon. Through the back of his office, the way patients went when they didn't want to be seen on the street. Prentice looked up, looked at the bruise on her temple, said nothing about it. Neither did she. "I need you to ride to Helena," she said. He looked at her over his spectacles. "To the marshal's office. Confirm a witness has arrived in Cold River, that the evidence at Hargrove and Webb is verified and available, that we are asking for immediate action and delay has consequences." Prentice was quiet. "I'm 71, Cordelia, I know. I haven't ridden hard in 6 years. The road is clear." 2 days. Edmund Volk, Cora said, is going to be too busy with what's happening in town to watch the South Road at 3 in the morning. Prentice looked at her for a long time. He looked at the bruise. He thought about 3 certificates. About the specific feeling of writing words you know are wrong and signing your name to them. He thought about Nolan Voss, who had been a patient, and about a Tuesday in October of 74 when he had been called to Shaft 3 and had looked at what was there and known, immediately, and with professional certainty, that what had happened was not an accident. He had written accident. He had signed his name. 3 in the morning, he said. "Yes, you'll cover the stable. Orrin will." He took off his spectacles, cleaned them, put them back on. "All right," he said. "God help me, that was the plan, except." Plans in Cold River had a way of encountering Edmund Volk. Cora was walking back as the afternoon light went gray when she turned a corner into the alley beside the boot repair shop and walked directly into Deputy Birch. He was standing there, waiting for her. Specifically, she stopped. One hand moved toward her coat pocket instinctively, checking for the tin box that was not there. It was under the bar, but the body's automatic accounting for what matters. Birch was 50. Face weathered into permanent neutral, the face of a man who had spent 20 years trying to be invisible and had mostly managed it. His badge caught the fading light. His hands were visible. Not on his gun, Mrs. Voss, deputy. He looked at the bruise. His jaw moved. "I heard about last night. Most of the town did. Prescott shouldn't have." He stopped. Started again. "I'm not here about last night." She waited. "Don't send Prentice tonight." Everything in her went completely still. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said. "Yes, you do." Not unkind. Just the exhausted flat of a man tired of performances. "Edmund knows you've been in contact with Hargrove and Webb. Doesn't know the details. But he knows you've been building something. He has a man in the Helena post office since 77. Cold settling into her chest. If Prentice rides out tonight, Mallory will know before he's 10 miles south. And what happens to a 71-year-old man on a dark road in December?" He didn't finish. Cora looked at him. The careful measuring look she gave everything now. "Then what do you suggest, Deputy Birch?" He reached into his coat. She almost stepped back. "Not a weapon, an envelope, sealed." "Official," she took it. Looked at the front, the seal of the United States Marshal's Office, District of Montana. She looked at Birch. Something in his face had changed. Or rather, something that had been submerged in it for a long time had surfaced. The look of a man who has been underwater too long and has finally decided to try for air. "I'm not just a deputy," he said. Cora stared at him. "Investigative correspondent for the Marshal's District since 78. Placed here after a miner named Garth Pello's brother filed a report in Helena in 77 about conditions and accidents in the Cold River mines." He paused. A much longer look, apparently. The envelope felt heavier. "I sent for the marshal 3 days ago," Birch said, "before your friend rode in. Because Jedediah Karn wrote to the marshal's office from Billings, and the marshal forwarded his letter to me for verification. And I verified it." He met her eyes. "The marshal left Helena 2 days ago. He'll be here tomorrow. Day after at latest." Cora looked down at the envelope. Looked up 6 years, she said. Very quiet. You've been here 6 years. Yes, you watched 11 funerals, his jaw worked. I know, you watched Nolan. I know. Harder now. The guilt in it clear and undefended. I didn't have enough, not for federal court. Volk is careful, extremely careful. I needed the original claim document. I needed a witness to the 61 attack. He stopped. I needed time I didn't have the right to take. No, Cora said. You didn't. They stood in the alley in the cold. Don't send Prentice, he said. Let me handle the South Road tonight. I'll make sure Mallory's eyes are looking the wrong direction. He pulled his coat tighter. And Mrs. Voss, tell Karn. The marshal is already moving. Hold until dawn the day after tomorrow. He turned to go. Birch, he stopped. Why are you telling me this now? He didn't turn immediately. When he did, his face had the look of a man who has been asking himself the same question and arrived at an answer he doesn't particularly like. Because I have a daughter, he said, and she learned to read in Edmund Volk's school. And I'd like her to unlearn that. He walked away. Cora stood in the alley holding the letter, until the cold reminded her that standing still in December was a decision with consequences. Then she walked back to the saloon fast. She told Jed at 6. He sat very still while she talked. That particular stillness that was not passivity was its opposite, concentration so complete it left no room for movement. When she finished, he was quiet. You believe him, he said. I do. Why? She considered this seriously. Because the answer mattered. He mentioned the brother, she said. Garth Pello's brother. I didn't know about any report filed in Helena. I didn't know there was a brother. There's no reason to invent that specific detail, she paused. And his face when I said 11 funerals. Jed looked at her. What did his face do? Nothing, she said. Which is exactly what guilt looks like when it's been living in someone for 6 years. He absorbed this, so the marshal is 2 days out. Maybe 1. Yes, and Mallory moves tonight or tomorrow before dawn. Yes. We need to hold the saloon for 36 hours. Just the saloon, Cora said. We don't need the town. Just one building. Orrin, listening from behind the bar with his arms crossed, and the expression of a man adding numbers whose sum he already knows, exhaled slowly. Board the windows, he said. Not yet, Cora said. If we board them now, Mallory knows we're expecting him. Let him think we're just a saloon. We are just a saloon, Orrin said. We're a saloon with a plan, Cora said. There's a difference. Then she told them about the tunnel. Both of them went very quiet. Nolan built it in 72, she said, before Volk put the tax on stored liquor. Runs from the hatch under the back storeroom to the stable floor next door, 40 feet. Low, 4.5 feet. You'd move through it bent. But it's dry and solid, and Volk has never known it exists. She paused. He told me about it the same night he told me about the claim certificate. He sat me down and told me everything he knew and everything he'd done and everything he was afraid of. All at once. He'd been keeping it from me for 3 months, trying to protect me. When he finally told me, he said he was sorry it had taken so long. The fire burned. Nobody said anything. He was sorry about a lot of things that weren't his fault, she said. Then, if Mallory breaches the front while you're already out through the tunnel, I come around behind his line, Jed said, while his men are inside looking for you in the dark, and I know every floorboard in this building, every one that creaks, every shadow the lamps make, every corner. She looked at him steadily. I manage what happens inside. You handle outside, Jed measured her. Not doubting, measuring. There was a difference, and she recognized it. You've been planning this for 6 years, he said. I've been planning something, she said. I didn't know what it would look like until you walked through the door. She told them about the root cellar, too. Northwest corner, old company supply hatch. Lock that appeared rusted shut since 1878, when she had quietly spent an afternoon replacing the mechanism with one that looked frozen from outside and opened smoothly from below. You're an unusual woman, Mrs. Voss, Jed said. From somewhere in the darkness later, I've been called worse. That wasn't a criticism, she almost smiled. Jed, yes, when this is over. Whatever happens. Nolan finding your piece of the certificate. Figuring out what it was and who it belonged to and reaching out to you. He didn't do that because he was trying to be a hero. He did it because he believed in a simple principle. What belongs to someone belongs to them. He was a very simple man. In the best sense of that word, a long quiet. He sounds like someone worth knowing, Jed said. He was, Cora said. He really was. 4:17 in the morning. The boots on the snow came before the voices. The specific crunch and compression of many feet moving in the dark, trying for quiet and mostly achieving it, except there were too many of them, and the snow was too hard, and quiet is always relative when you're listening for it. Cora was flat against the back wall of the bar, below the window line. She had been there 20 minutes. Orrin was behind the bar, his usual place, except his hands were not on a glass. Mallory's voice came from outside. Low. He knew they were awake. He didn't care, Karn. Step out. Nobody here needs a bad morning except you. Silence, Mrs. Voss. You're a sensible woman. Walk out. No one touches you. Silence, a pause. Then one word, fire. 16 Winchester rifles at once. The sound was not a series of shots. It was a continuous catastrophe. One long rolling thunder. The windows went first, both of them, exploding inward in a shower of glittering fragments. The door absorbed 30 rounds in the first 5 seconds, and became a collection of oak components held together by memory. The wall above the bar grew splinters. The mirror, the good mirror, Nolan's mirror, carried up from Billings in '73 at considerable personal cost, came apart. The piano was briefly very loud and then was not. Cora was below all of it. Flat, arms over her head, taking what it could. The roar went on, and on, then stopped. The silence after it was enormous, pressurized. The kind of silence that has weight you can feel on your skin. Move in. The ruined door came off its remaining hinge. 6 men through the gap, thick dust, smell of black powder, dim light making everything flat. They came through with rifles up and eyes moving, and found a saloon that appeared to contain nothing living. Spread, Mallory said from the doorway. Find him. They moved carefully, because even experienced men get careful in rooms they can't see well. Because rooms you can't see well have a tendency to shoot back. The first went to the bar, looked over. Orrin was not behind it, not right. The second went to the stairs. The third reached the center of the room, and the floorboard under him creaked, not loudly. Slightly, just enough because Cora was beneath the floor. She had gone down the tunnel hatch in the storeroom while the rifles were still firing, through 40 feet of tight earth walled dark by feel alone. She had walked it a dozen times to memorize it, up into the stable, and not outside, back in, through the root cellar. She was in the northwest corner behind a stack of crates. Not armed with a gun, she had a lamp, unlit, a box of matches, and she had spent the previous 3 hours very quietly, moving every kerosene lantern in the building to positions she had chosen for a specific reason. She waited. Watched the shapes moving through her space, her saloon. 12 years of her life. She watched one man reach the bar. Another approached the storeroom door. She struck the match. What happened next in the following 4 minutes was never properly reconstructed by anyone who tried, because the people inside couldn't see well enough to track the sequence, and the people outside heard things without seeing them, and the result was a collection of conflicting accounts that agreed on the outcome and disagreed on almost everything else. What everyone agreed on. A sudden bright bloom of light in the northwest corner that made every man in the room lose a full second of vision, then sounds. A shin against something hard. Somebody walking into a table that wasn't where tables were supposed to be. In the dark and dust and sudden blinding light, the men inside were disoriented, and Orrin Dabb came out from under the stairs, which was not where anyone was looking, with a double-barreled shotgun cocked in a small enclosed space, which is a very specific and very persuasive sound. Down, Orrin said. All of you. 2 barrels, 6 men. I will absolutely make the math work. 2 went flat immediately, not shot. A practical assessment of risk made very quickly. The other 4 met Jed Karn. He came through the back storeroom door, which meant he had used the tunnel, which meant he had been in the stable, which meant he had circled while the shooting was happening. And the 4 men understood in the moment before it began that they had been arranged like pins at the end of a lane. It was quick. It was not pleasant to be on the receiving end of. When it was over, 6 men were on the floor in various states of incapacitation, none dead, none entirely certain how they had arrived at their current position. Mallory was still at the door. He looked at what had been 6 men and was now 6 problems. He looked at Jed standing in the dust and lamplight. He reached behind him and pulled Volk through the gap. Prescott, pale, eyes very wide, legs still healing from 2 nights ago. Mallory's hand on his collar, Edmund Volk's plan. His son is the variable that stops the hand. Jed went still, gun up. Mallory's Winchester at Prescott's head. Lower it, Mallory said. Jed looked at Prescott. Prescott looked back. And here was the thing about that look. It was not arrogant, not entitled, not the look of a boy in a good suit who had never been told no. All of that was gone. What was left was something more honest and considerably more frightened. A young man in a situation he had not agreed to, placed here by his father, with apparently no great consideration for what the placement would feel like. Jed lowered the gun. Mallory pushed Prescott aside, raised his Winchester. Cora stepped out of the northwest corner, holding the tin box. "Fetch," she said. Mallory turned the way a man turns when he believes what is behind him is not a real threat. Slow, slightly contemptuous of the interruption, he looked at the woman in the lamplight with a tin box in her hands. "Mrs. Voss," he said. Politely, "Do you know what's in this box?" "Edmund told me about the documents." "Then you know what happens if this box reaches Helena." "It's not going to reach Helena," Mallory said. "Come here and give it to me." Cora did not move. "When I was 32 years old," she said, "my husband told me that bad men rely on good people staying afraid of them. He said the only thing that ever stopped a bad man was someone deciding the fear was less important than what was on the other side of it." She looked at Mallory steadily. "I have been afraid of Edmund Volk for 6 years. I have been afraid every morning I opened this building and every night I locked it. I have been afraid at 11 funerals. I have been afraid every time Prescott walked through that door and every time Birchworth looked the other way." She paused. "I'm not afraid right now," she said, "and I'd like you to think of what that means is." Mallory's eyes were doing arithmetic. She could see it. The document, the woman, the man behind him, the 6 men on the floor. The morning coming whether he wanted it or not. Something in the calculation was coming back wrong. He was still looking at the tin box when through the ruined window a light appeared in the street. Then another. Then another. Lantern light. Moving, not Mallory's men. Miners. Work clothes, coats, hats pulled against the cold. Standing across Main Street in a line, not 1 or 2, 14 of them. Holding lanterns. Just standing. No guns. No weapons. 14 men in the December dark holding lanterns. And looking at the Copper Bell Saloon and not going anywhere. Cora had not told Jed about this part. Had not told Orrin, because some things you can plan and some things you can only ask for. 3 weeks ago she had gone quietly from house to house, knock by knock, not asking for heroes, not asking for guns, just asking 14 men to stand in the street holding a light if they ever heard shooting from the direction of her saloon. Just stand. Just hold the light. Just be present where people could see them. 14 men had said yes. Mallory looked at the lights through what remained of the window. He looked at Jed. He looked at Cora. He looked at Prescott sitting against the wall with his bad leg, looking at his father's enforcer, with an expression that was doing something complicated and new. Fecus Mallory lowered his Winchester. Not a surrender. Below the chest. Below the line of decision, "Edmund is not going to be happy," he said. "No," Cora agreed. "He isn't." Mallory stood for a long moment, and then, very quietly, in a voice that might have been talking to himself, he said, "Neither am I." He set the Winchester on the floor, stepped back, sat down, just sat down. Orrin and Jed looked at each other across the wreckage of the saloon. Nobody spoke for a moment. Then Orrin went behind the bar, by pure habit. He found the coffee pot, which had survived, and the stove, which was still going, and he filled 2 cups, brought one to Cora. She took it with both hands. They stood in the lamplight of the Copper Bell, in the rubble and the dust and the smell of cordite. Outside, 14 lanterns burned steadily in the dark street. None of the men holding them moved, they just held the light. That was all. It was enough. Dawn came slow to Cold River, the way it always did in December, not sudden, reluctant, the dark thinning at the edges first, gray bleeding into black above the eastern ridge, then pale. Then the particular cold white of a Montana winter morning that has no warmth, but has a brutal clarity that makes everything look more real than it did in the dark. The 14 lanterns were still burning in the street. None of the men had moved. Some had shifted weight, swapped the lantern from one hand to the other, pulled their coats tighter against the dropping temperature of the hour before dawn. But none had left. because leaving would have required a decision, and the decision had already been made when they showed up, and you don't unmake that kind of decision at 4 in the morning, just because your feet are cold and the wind has opinions about it. Cora stood at what remained of the front window. The Corbett was there, but the young miner still knew enough that his hands didn't have the full callus yet, holding his lantern with both hands, looking straight ahead with an expression of concentrated determination that was going to cost him something when the adrenaline wore off. But he was there, Ann Jensen, and men she knew by name, and men she knew only by face, and 2 she had never seen before in her life, which meant they had heard and come anyway, 14 men. For a woman who had been managing alone for 6 years, 14 was a number that required some adjustment. Behind her the Copper Bell was a ruin, functionally, the mirror gone, both windows, the door more suggestion than door. The walls had taken enough lead to look like something had been very angry at them for a very long time, which she supposed was accurate. 3 tables splintered, 2 chairs that no longer existed in any meaningful structural sense. The piano a casualty she was going to feel later when there was time to feel things. But the bar was standing, the stove was going, the coffee was hot, which was, she thought, the essential thing. Fetch Mallory sat against the wall with his wrists bound, 6 of his men in similar arrangements. 4 had been permitted to leave through the back. When it became clear they were more interested in departing than continuing, which Orrin had allowed because there was a practical limit to how many people you could usefully tie up in a damaged saloon at 4 in the morning. Prescott was not tied. He sat in the one chair with all 4 legs still attached, near the stove, holding his bad leg with both hands and looking at the floor. He had not spoken since Mallory sat down, which for Prescott Volk was a genuinely extraordinary condition. Jed stood at the bar, not sitting. He sat when he was waiting and stood when he was thinking. Right now he was very clearly thinking. He'll know by now, Jed said. Yes, Mallory didn't bring me in. Yes. The men in the street are still there. Yes. So what does Edmund Volk do? Jed said, working through it the way a man works through a calculation he's been running a long time, when his plan fails and his enforcer is on someone else's floor. Cora thought about Edmund Volk, 62 years old, 40 years of decisions made from a distance and executed by other people. A man who directed the picking up of tools and stood back and measured results. But Mallory was on the floor, and the men were in the street, and Jedediah Karn was still alive. He comes himself, Cora said. Jed nodded. He comes himself, he agreed. Edmund Volk arrived at 6:43 in the morning, alone, which was the most frightening thing about it. No guards, no Birch, no remaining hired men, just Edmund, walking down Main Street with his silver-tipped cane and his heavy coat and his white hair, walking slowly because he always walked slowly, the limp giving each step its particular rhythm, the cane finding purchase on the packed snow. The 14 men in the street watched him come. He did not look at them, not once. He looked straight ahead. He walked to the door of the Copper Bell, stopped, looked at what the door had become, pushed it open, stepped inside. The lamplight caught him. His spectacles reflected 2 small flames. He looked around the room slowly, taking inventory, the damage, the men on the floor, Mallory against the wall, Prescott in the corner. He looked at his son for a moment. Something moved through his face. Hard to name exactly. Not grief, not regret. Something more like the look of a man who has made a very precise calculation and is seeing for the first time that the calculation missed a variable. And the variable was significant. Then he looked at Jed. Jed looked at him. 19 years in the room between them. Not words, not guns. 19 years of distance that had seemed like safety and had turned out to be a corridor that led here, to this room, this morning, this particular cold light. Edmund Volk was not a small man. Even now at 62 with the limp and the cane and the morning catching the silver in his hair, there was gravity to him. The gravity of a man who had made things happen for a long time and had come to inhabit that power the way a person inhabits their own body. Without thinking about it because it had always been there. Except the room didn't move for him this time. Rooms always moved for Edmund Volk. People adjusted, stepped back, found reasons to look at other things. The gravity worked on them automatically, but Cora was behind the bar and didn't move, and Jed was at the bar and didn't move, and Orrin stood beside Cora with his hand below the counter and didn't move. and the room stayed exactly where it was. Edmund stopped in the center of the floor. He looked at Cora. "Cordelia," he said. "Mr. Volk," she said, "you've made quite a mess of my property. Your men made the mess. I provided the building." He almost smiled. "Almost. I suppose that's technically accurate." He looked around again. "How many of my men are hurting?" Orrin said. "There's a difference. None of them are permanent." He looked at Mallory. Mallory looked back. Without expression, something passed between them. An acknowledgement of a specific kind of failure that both men understood and neither was going to discuss in front of anyone else. Then Edmund Volk turned to Jedediah Karn. And for the first time that morning he looked like what he actually was. Old, not frail, not beaten. Old in the way that truth makes a man old when he finally has to stand next to it without the buffer of distance between them. "Jedediah," he said, Edmund, first names. After 19 years. The intimacy of it strange and heavy. "You look well," Edmund said. Given, Jed agreed. Edmund moved to the nearest standing table, pulled out a chair, sat, set his cane across his knees, wiped his spectacles with a cloth from his coat pocket, put them back on, as if they were about to have a business meeting, as if there weren't 6 men on the floor and 14 lanterns burning outside, and a tin box on the bar and 20 years of crime between them. "Sit down, Jedediah." Jed pulled out the chair across from him, sat. Cora did not move, did not speak. This was not her moment to speak, and she knew it. She had known it every time she had imagined this morning, which she had done many times. This specific conversation between these specific men had to run its course before anything else could happen. But she listened. Every word. "I want you to know something," Edmund said. "Say it the way a man says something he has been carrying for a while. Not heavily, not with drama, with the flashes of a weight, carried so long it has stopped feeling like weight." "I thought you were dead," he said. "Genuinely. Fetch told me it was done. I believed him. For 19 years I believed him." He paused. "That doesn't change what I ordered. I'm not using it as an excuse. I'm using it as a fact." Jed looked at him. "A fact," he said. "Yes, you ordered a man to put a bullet in my back and leave me in a ditch. And the fact you'd like me to appreciate is that you believe the order was completed." "Yes. All right," Jed said. "I appreciate the fact. Now I'll give you one." Edmund waited. "When I woke up in that ditch, I was 23 years old. I had $40 to my name and a hole in my left side and the paper that was supposed to be my future in someone else's hand. I walked 8 miles south before I found a road. Found the road before I found a person. Found the person before I found a doctor. The doctor was not particularly good." He looked at Edmund steadily. "I spent 6 weeks in a barn in Yellowstone County, waiting to find out which direction I was going. It went the right way. But it was not a comfortable 6 weeks." Edmund said nothing. "After that, I spent 19 years. Moving, working, never here, never near here, because coming here without the means to finish would have been the same as not coming. I learned the law. I found the right people. I found the right moment." He put his hands on the table, the scarred hands. The hands that had held the torn corner of a claim certificate in every coat pocket he'd owned for 19 years, always transferred when the coat changed. "And I came." Edmund looked at the hands. "What do you want, Jedediah?" "I want the truth on the record. Official, legal, documented. I want a court to see the original claim certificate and understand what you built and what you built it on." He paused. "And I want the men who worked these mines for 18 years to have something that isn't owned by you." Edmund's jaw moved. "The mines are worth. I know what they're worth. I filed the original claim," the voice still quiet, still level, the anger in it very deep and very contained. "I'm not here for money, Edmund. I'm here because Nolan Voss is dead and 11 other men are dead, and they died because you decided your convenience was worth more than their lives. And I want that on the record. Before God and federal court and whatever comes after." Silence. The fire, the wind. And then Edmund Volk did something nobody in the room expected. He nodded once, slowly. The nod of a man who has been running a very long race and has finally, at the very end of it, reached the line. "All right," he said. Just that. "All right." Cora let out a breath she had been holding for 6 years, quickly. Slowly. The way you release something held so carefully for so long that the releasing has to be done with the same care as the holding. Orrin, behind the bar, set down the shotgun. It made a sound on the wood. a sound that meant something. Prescott in his corner was watching his father, not with anger, not with the collapsed arrogance of a young man exposed, with something more bewildered and more honest. The look of a 24-year-old who has hurt his father, agree to his own accountability, and is trying to understand what kind of world that makes him a part of now. Mallory, against the wall, had closed his eyes, not sleeping. Processing. The arithmetic running still, even now, even here, with his wrists bound and his plans on the floor. Calculating what the new arrangement of facts meant specifically for Fetch Mallory. What came next, what it cost, whether it was worth it. He was always doing arithmetic, it was just that the numbers had changed. Edmund Volk stood slowly, leaned on his cane. He looked around the room one more time. His saloon, his building. Except it wasn't. That was the thing he had been telling himself for 18 years, and was now being asked to stop telling himself permanently. He looked at Cora. "You stayed," he said. 6 years. "You could have run, I know. Why didn't you?" She had answered this question before, to Jed. She gave Edmund a different answer, shorter. "Because Nolan built the tunnel under this floor by himself," she said, "in the winter of '72. 3 months of evenings by lamplight, to protect something that mattered to him." She looked at Edmund without blinking. "I wasn't going to leave until I knew that meant something." He looked at her for a long moment. Something in him. Not a lot. Not enough to undo anything. But something acknowledged what she had said. He turned toward the door. Stopped. Prescott. Prescott looked up. Edmund did not look at him. Looked at the door. Spoke to the door. "Whatever you decide to do with what comes after this, make sure it's yours." "Not mine," he walked out, the cane on the broken floorboards, its particular rhythm. Into the cold morning air. Through the door he'd walked through for the last time. The marshal arrived at 9:14, 2 of them, riding from the south, hard enough that the horse's breath came in great white clouds. Federal badges catching the light when their coats shifted in the wind. They came to the Copper Bell first, because the lanterns were still burning in the street, and the building looked like it had recently experienced strong opinions. And Main Street was very clearly where the morning was located. Marshal Devereaux was 54, broad-shouldered, face like a good map, everything important clearly marked, nothing decorative. He came through the door and stopped and read the room, the way a man reads rooms when he has walked into a lot of them and has learned what the details mean. 6 men on the floor, Mallory against the wall. Jed at the bar, Cora behind it. "Mrs. Voss," he said. "Marshal Devereaux. We received correspondence from a Mr. Jedediah Karn in Billings approximately 8 days ago. We have documents at Hargrove and Webb dating to '79. He looked at the tin box on the bar. "Is that?" "Yes," she said. He walked over, she opened it. He looked at the 2 pieces of claim certificate married at their torn edges, looked at them carefully, at the names, the date, the seal of the Cold River Assay Office from 1859. He was quiet for a moment. "Where is Edmund Volk?" "His estate." "Up on the hill." Cora paused. "He'll be expecting you." He said, "All right." Devereaux looked at her. He said, "All right, yes." "To what specifically?" "To being on the record." Jed said from his end of the bar. The marshal looked at him. The scar on his jaw. The hands on the bar. "You're Karn." "Yes, the man who put the bullet in you in '61. Fetch Mallory." Against the wall, Devereaux turned and looked at Mallory. Mallory opened his eyes, the arithmetic still running, and then, slowly, Fetch Mallory said something nobody in the room expected. "I'll testify," he said. "Full account. Everything from '61 forward. What I was instructed to do. By who. On what occasions." He paused. "In exchange for consideration of time served." "That's for the court," Devereaux said. "I understand. I'm not asking for a guarantee. I'm asking for the opportunity to give an accurate account." It's a shorter pause. "There are things in that account that go beyond Edmund Volk. Names you'll want. Names you don't have yet." The room was very quiet. "How many names?" Devereaux said. "Enough," Mallory said, "to keep you busy for a while." They took Edmund Volk at 10. He was in his study, sitting in his leather chair, dressed, hair combed, the cane across his knees the same way he'd held it in the saloon, like he'd come home and sat down and decided to wait. A glass of whiskey on the desk beside him. Untouched, Devereaux read the charge. Land fraud under federal statute. Conspiracy to commit murder. Jedediah Karn, 1861, and Nolan Voss, 1874. Additional counts pending investigation. Edmund listened to all of it. He said nothing. He stood when they asked him to stand. He walked when they asked him to walk. He did not ask for his lawyer, though he certainly had one. Made no statements, no protests. He walked out of his house on his own terms, which was perhaps the last thing he was going to do on his own terms, and he seemed to understand this and had decided to do it correctly. The miners were in the street, not just the 14. More. Word had moved through Cold River the way it always moved in small towns, fast and complete and finding every corner. 30, maybe 35 people on Main Street when Edmund Volk came out. They didn't cheer, didn't jeer, they just watched. Which was somehow more significant than either. Edmund walked through them without looking left or right, and got into the marshal's wagon and sat down. The last thing he did before the wagon moved was look up at the hill, at the house he'd built, the Victorian excess of it above the mining camp, the windows glittering in the winter sun. Then he looked straight ahead, and the wagon went. Prescott was still in the saloon when Cora came back. She had expected him to be gone. Had in some part of herself hoped he'd be gone, because gone would have been simpler than whatever this was. But he was there in his four legs by the stove. He looked up when she came through the door. She stopped, looked at him. The broadcloth suit was wrinkled. One sleeve had something on it that might have been blood from when he hit the wall, hair out of its arrangement, eyes red at the edges. Not from crying exactly. From the particular exhaustion of spending a night having your entire understanding of your own life reassembled while you watch. He was 24 years old. Cora thought about being 24. The distance between 24 and 58. What that distance contained. She went to the bar, got 2 cups, poured coffee, brought one over, set it beside his chair. He looked at it, then at her. Why? Because it's cold, she said, and you've been in that chair since midnight. He wrapped both hands around the cup. She sat in the other chair, the one Jed had been using, the one across from where Edmund had sat. She drank her coffee and looked at the fire. I didn't know, Prescott said. She waited. About the claim. About Karn. About... He stopped. I knew my father was. I'm not stupid. I knew something was wrong with the accidents. I knew they weren't. He stopped again. But you chose not to look at it directly, Cora said. Not judging. Just stating. Yes, most people do. That's not. He shook his head. That's not an excuse. No, she said. It isn't. But it's not the same as doing it yourself either. He looked at her, trying to understand why she was being kind to him. You should hate me, he said. I don't have the energy for it, she said, and it wouldn't accomplish anything. I hit you. You did. I could have. Yes, you could have. She looked at him steadily. But you didn't pull a gun. And when Mallory put you in that doorway, you didn't fight it. But you also didn't look at Karn with any particular desire to see him dead. I noticed that. She paused. You're not your father, Prescott. You're a 24-year-old who was handed a poison and told it was inheritance. What you do next is something I genuinely can't predict. But I think that's true for you too. And that means something. Prescott stared at the fire. The men in the street, he said finally. Who organized that? I did. He looked at her. 3 weeks ago, before Karn arrived. I went to people I thought could be trusted, and I told them what might happen and asked them to be present if it did. She drank her coffee. Most of them had known something was wrong for a long time. They just needed someone to ask. That's all. Just ask. That's often all it takes. People are waiting to be asked to be brave, not told. Asked. He was quiet for a while, then carefully, like placing something fragile on an uncertain surface. What happens to the mines, federal court will decide. A year or more. The men keep working in the meantime. She paused. There'll need to be someone managing day-to-day operations until the legal situation resolves. Someone with knowledge of the business. Prescott looked at her. She looked back. You're suggesting. I'm pointing out a fact, she said. What you do with facts is your own affair. He watched the fire for a long time. The school, he said suddenly. What about it? My father built it. His name is above the door. But the children who go there. He stopped. That's not their fault. Cora looked at him for a long moment. No, she said. It isn't. It's a good school. It is a good school, she agreed. Something settled in him. Not resolved. Not fixed. Settled. The way you settle into something difficult when you realize you're going to be carrying it a long time and you need to find the right way to hold it. He stood. His leg was bad, and he took a moment to acknowledge that. Mrs. Voss. He looked at her. I'm sorry for what I did to you. In this room, he paused. I'm sorry for what my family has done to this town. I don't know what that apology is worth right now. Probably not much, she said. But come back in 10 years and we'll see. He almost smiled. Then he went. Birch came in at 2 that afternoon. Stood at the bar without sitting. Looked at the oilcloth Cora had tacked over the window frames, the swept floors. The careful arrangement of what remained. Marshal Devereaux wants a statement from you, he said. Tomorrow morning, he also. Tomorrow, Birch, a silence. My full report goes to Helena, he said. The placement. Duration. What I observed and documented, he paused. Your name will be in it. Several times I expect it will. As cooperating civilian, he said carefully, not as a suspect. In case that needed saying. It didn't, she said. But thank you. He put his hands on the bar. Looked at them. Was it enough? He said. Cora stopped polishing. You kept Prentice safe last night, she said. You gave me the letter. You're on the right side of this room at 2 in the afternoon. She paused. Whether it was enough is something you're going to be working out for a while. I don't think I'm the right person to give you the final answer on that, he nodded. He left. Orrin watched him go. He's going to lose a lot of sleep, Orrin said. Yes, Cora said. He is. That's the appropriate consequence. She went back to polishing. Jed came down from his room at 4. He had slept for 5 hours. She could tell by the quality of alertness in him. The alertness of someone who has been running on necessity and has finally had a chance to actually rest. He sat at his corner table. She brought coffee. He wrapped his hands around the mug. Same table. Same stillness. Everything the same, except nothing was. Edmund will face the court in Helena, Jed said. Yes, Mallory's testimony will be significant. I know it won't be quick. Federal land fraud at this scale. My account. Your account. Birch's file. Better part of a year to resolve, I know. He was quiet. I should stay, he said. For the proceedings, you should. That means Cold River for several more months, it does. He looked into his coffee. There's a room upstairs, she said. Heated, more or less, depending on the wind direction. The mattress has been described as adequate by people with modest expectations. The rate is reasonable. Coffee is included. He looked up. She was looking at the fire. Not at him, Mrs. Voss, he said. The rate is reasonable, she said again. That's all I'm saying. A silence then. All right, she nodded. Got up. Went behind the bar. Started preparing for the evening. But they would come in. She knew they would come in. Because Cold River would come in, like it always had. It would sit down and drink what she poured and talk about what had happened, the way people always talk about things that changed everything, in circles, unresolved, necessary. And she would be there, behind the bar. Except the tin box was not under the floorboard anymore. It was on the shelf behind the bar, visible, in the open. She had put it there that morning because there was no longer any reason to hide it, and there was a specific satisfaction in that visibility she wanted to feel every time she walked past. Nolan's letter was in her coat pocket, not in the box, on her, because she was not done with it yet. She reached into the pocket, felt the folded edge of it, did not take it out. I waited, she thought. I found him. We did it. I wish you could have been here. You were here, in the floorboard, in the tunnel. In every morning I opened on time when I didn't want to. You were here the whole time. She took her hand out of her pocket. Got back to work. Jed stayed through spring. The federal proceedings moved at federal speed, with great deliberateness and a thorough disregard for anyone's personal timeline. His testimony was required twice in Helena, and once at the marshal's office in Cold River itself. Documents to review. Statements to verify. The exhausting particulars of undoing 18 years of careful construction through the mechanism of law. He fixed the door in February, not because anyone asked, because it needed fixing and he had the skills, and the materials were available. And leaving a door in that condition through a Montana winter was a practical problem with a practical solution. Cora watched him work from behind the bar. She said nothing about it. He said nothing about it. Orrin said something under his breath that might have been the word, finally, and then became very interested in the glasses he was drying. The mirror was replaced in March, smaller than the original, but clean and honest, which Cora decided was the better trade. The piano was replaced in April. Slightly better than the original, actually. Better tuning pegs, keys that responded cleanly. Jensen's nephew could play 3 songs, and was persuaded to demonstrate them on Friday evenings, which was not musical sophistication, but was considerably better than the silence that had preceded it. On a Tuesday morning in late April, a letter arrived from Hargrove and Webb in Helena. The federal court had issued its ruling. The original claim on the Silver Bell mine, fraudulently transferred to Edmund Volk in 1861, was to be restored to its rightful owner, Jedediah Karn, all subsequent extraction revenue to be assessed pending further judicial review. The mining operation to continue under temporary federal supervision, with the existing workforce retained at improved rates per the court's recommendation. Edmund Volk sentenced to 14 years. Fex Mallory, in recognition of complete and verified testimony, 8 years, which was still 8 years. The arithmetic for once had not favored him. Prescott Volk appointed by court recommendation and with the federal supervisor's agreement as interim operations manager of the Cold River mines pending final asset resolution. He was going to spend the next year or more managing the thing his father had stolen, on behalf of the man it had been stolen from. Not justice exactly, but the kind of irony Cora thought Nolan would have found satisfying. She read the letter twice, put it in the tin box, put the box back on the shelf. Jed was at his corner table when she came out. She put the letter in front of him. He read it again, set it down, looked at it for a while, then he looked up at her, and there was something in his face she had not seen before in all the months he had been in that room. Not relief, not triumph, something older than both. The specific look of a man who has been carrying a weight for a very long time and has finally. Set it down, the mine, he said. What happens to it? That's for you to decide, she said. I was 23 when I filed that claim. He paused. I'm 42 now, which means 19 years of not knowing anything about running a silver operation. Consistent at least, she said. Something moved through his expression. Something that in another man might have been the beginning of a smile. The mine employs 67 men, he said. 3 hired on in March, she agreed, with families. In this town, most of them in houses that until recently were owned by Edmund Volk. What happens to the houses? Federal asset review. The men keep living in them for now. Could be years before the court decides, she paused. There's a reasonable argument that the houses should be transferred to the occupants. Given the wages that weren't paid over 18 years and the conditions that weren't maintained. That argument would need someone to make it to the right people in Helena. Jed looked at her. You already know which people. He said, I may have done some preliminary research, she said. He looked at the letter, looked at the ceiling, looked at his coffee, Mrs. Voss. Yes. How long have you been running this town? She considered this seriously. About 6 years, she said. Give or take. He picked up the letter, folded it, put it in his coat pocket. Stood. I need to go to Helena, he said. I know. Back by end of the week, I know. He put on his hat, walked to the door he had fixed in February. Stopped. The claim certificate, he said without turning, the original, both pieces together. What should be done with it? Cora thought about this. The court has a copy, she said. The original needs somewhere it can be preserved. Somewhere people can see it, she paused. The school has a reading room. North wall. There's a space where there used to be a painting of someone's hunting dogs that nobody missed. Jed was quiet. A claim certificate in a school, he said. With a note, she said. Explaining what it is, what it cost, what it took to get it back. He was still for a moment. All right, he said. He went out the door, closed behind him. Cora stood at the bar, looked at the tin box on the shelf, looked at the small, clean mirror that told the truth now, looked at the new glass in the windows catching the April light in a way that was almost warm. She reached into her coat pocket, took out Nolan's letter, unfolded it. Read it. One last time, wait for someone who isn't afraid of Edmund Volk, and the last line locked the door at night. She folded it. She walked to the east table, the one by the window. She lifted the table leg, pressed the floorboard with her foot until she felt the notch Nolan had cut with his pocket knife all those years ago. She thought about it. Then she didn't lift the board. She didn't need the space under the floor anymore. She went behind the bar, opened the tin box, placed the letter inside. Next to the 2 halves of the claim certificate that would go to Helena next week, and then to a frame on a school wall, to be read by children who would not understand it at first and would understand it more as they grew. She closed the box, put it back on the shelf, picked up a cloth, started polishing the bar. At 6, the first customers came in. They stopped in the doorway at the sight of the new glass, and the new mirror and the absence of the piano, and the overall atmosphere of a room that had recently been through something, and had not pretended otherwise. She said the same thing to each of them. Come in. Sit down. It's cold outside, and they came in, and they sat down, because it was cold outside, and because the Copper Bell was where you went in Cold River. Because whatever else had changed, Cordelia Voss was behind the bar, and the coffee was hot, and the fire was going, and the door was fixed, and the lights were on. That was enough. That had always been enough. By 8, the room was full, warm, loud with the ordinary sound of people who had survived something together and didn't have a word for it yet but were glad, in the specific wordless way of people who know what the alternative was, to be alive in the same room. Cora moved behind the bar, pouring, listening, not joining in, same as always, except she caught herself smiling once, briefly, when Corbett told a story that didn't quite make sense but made everyone laugh anyway, and the lamp caught the side of her face. And Orrin saw it and said nothing. He just refilled the glasses. The night went on, and outside, Cold River, Montana, lay quiet under the April sky. The last of the winter snow melting slow off the rooftops. The mountain above the town, dark and solid and indifferent to everything that had happened at its foot, the way mountains always are. They don't observe human things. They don't adjust to them. They just stand. But the lanterns were on in the houses. All of them. Every single one. And that was something the mountain could not claim credit for. That was theirs.